that name.
I think the first edition, I've only seen one case of those books, and that sounds like
good.
So we kind of sold down, from like Salt Lake City, there was a big library at Missouri. I think they were all big college libraries, could be, private places, think that it might actually use it.
Well, I'm sure.
you have one, and you would save your money, so you have to do it. So. And then if you don't want to keep that t-shirts, if you want to keep there's clothes.
Oh, yeah, because I'm sure it would be nice, or I'm sure everyone, if they buy one, they want the second or whatever. But for some reason, you don't want to see the first part. So then, are you thinking about getting just the 30 start over the 50?
Well, I got an estimate, the 25 copies is $955, and 100 copies is $3,820. So at this point, you can now make copies.
Okay, okay.
But
Don't look like there's that much of a break. Okay. I suppose if the original cost is be setting it up, and everything else, once that's done, you store, then it wouldn't be a big problem. Rebind some more.
The original book was, this is only, I've estimated 600, based on the number of pages of books that section, and it was in duplicate index.
Okay. Is any more discussion on that item? We're working on it eventually.
I volunteer the libraries on. I believe this one, but mostly everybody has. Interested in that. And show you, I really need you, you don't have to call me. I'll look it out. Maybe.
Okay.
You guys doing that, set you up with that, look at it.
One of the things that I like is we're going to have to get a nominating that put together here. And I probably need to have it done today, Ken, on count of, we'll have it. The election is actually not November, but that will give you plenty of time. Is there anybody here that would like to work on that? Pays good. Yeah, right. I don't even. I think you was on last time, Susan. You wanted to get? Sure. Okay. Well, Roger, would you help? Yeah. How many did you have last time?
3.
You'll do it? Okay. Joyce do? Okay. So that will make 4. Is that correct? Is that all right with everybody? Okay, well then you four, I guess you can decide when you want to get together and do it. Go from there. Of course, Tom's always needing an editor. And
Always accept a replacement.
but he also hasn't walked out. That's why I guess that's the reason he's still doing.
No, I already did. I got it back.
You do a good job, Tom. I know you do a better job than I can. So. One of the things we were talking about that, I got a chuckle out of this. I don't know if you, anyone read it or read through it all or not, but you want to look over there where he's got the title there, that Burnside's family and the Burnsides and life of the family. I think that's very interesting. Or he gets he's got a divorce and then he ends up getting arrested after his divorce or sleeping with another woman, or he wasn't. They separated, but it wasn't divorced. But I thought how things have changed. There's probably half of America would be arrested this day and age. So
I have a similar type of story in the September issue, which I've got started.
I thought that was kind of funny to read through that and think, boy, our jails would really be full. We include all that today, wouldn't it? Do you have anything more for business, Tom?
Nope.
Okay. Anyone else here have any other questions, new business? If not, we'll get on with our program here. Tom's got a familiar person here in Wells County that has a program today, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I interrupt this?
Yeah.
But I don't know the information about this, but somebody called me this morning about there's going to be I think it's a now sponsored walk of interesting places of downtown walk. And it's $45 or $40, something like that, 45 for the tour. So anybody that's interested might take a look, see and see what it is they're on Facebook.
Anything else? If not, there, Tom, you can introduce Craig, whatever. You're welcome to. You can set over there, so I'll get out of the way here.
Well, he asked for a podium, so I got that set up. So for Craig is a like Alan, polymath, very knowledgeable in anything architectural, historical, and variety of other things. Of course, being a class of '68 from Bluffton, he's one of the good guys. So Craig is all yours.
You know how to shut it up. Kind of like.
I turn up.
Yeah, good. Good.
I just turn off.
Technologically obsolete. It's usually somebody trying to sell me a Medicare supplement. Okay. Anyway, yeah, if you haven't seen it, Tom Texel newsletter has a summary of the members of the Kunkel clan. Thank you all for coming today, and out there in Zoom land, I know there's at least one Kunkel descendant in Indianapolis watching, sitting in, and I don't know about you, but I always like old maps. I'm going to flash through a couple maps that were in the annual reports of the state geologists, and I laid them out on the camera over here, 1901 and 1907. They're fascinating to look at in terms of the growth of the Indiana oil field. But the Indiana oil boom is really pretty much an untold story in terms of what is in print. There's very little. It's mostly buried in newspaper accounts. And I'll show you a couple of things here in a second that will kind of explain that. That's not the first slide. I'm going to start by setting the table here for how does the boom come about. In 1885, at Eaton, in the north edge of Delaware County, there was an existing well that somebody dug deeper, and they struck natural gas. And that was the start of the Indiana natural gas boom. And it wasn't until 5 years later, in the summer of 1890, just to the southeast of Keystone in southern Wells County, that the first commercially viable oil well in Indiana brought in. It was on land that was owned by Dr. Calvin Shull of Montpelier. Dr. Shull these days is notable primarily for the brick house he built in Montpelier that was once a restaurant known as the Brick House. But he became the president of what was dubbed the Northern Indiana Oil Company. And it was a group of investors. They operated for about 10 years and then they sold out to people on Wall Street, made a killing. One thing that is interesting about finding sources is that whether you're looking at papers from Fort Wayne or Indianapolis or Bluffton or wherever, if there's news about the boom, it's usually Dateline Montpelier. And the reason for this is that Montpelier sits on the dividing line, oil to the north, gas to the south. And thankfully, I have a friend who's a petroleum geologist who's helped me sort all this stuff out. And it turns out that the two classes of wildcatters didn't particularly get along well because oil or gas had been found first. So by 1890, when the oil boom begins, the state has put a lot of laws on the books that restrict the ways in which people could do things with gas that were wasteful. Like, for instance, in Hartford City, they had standpipes that lined the streets, burned night and day. It's called flambeau. That was their street light. And so the oil wildcatters who came in here, mostly from Western Pennsylvania, they were really ticked off about all the things that they couldn't do because the gas guys felt like the oil guys were getting away with work because all the things they could do that they were prevented by state law, like burning off methane when they brought in a well and using it to power their engine until it ran out. One thing that we do have in print that's a great source, primary source, is this little book that I gave this copy to the library about 2008 when I found it at the state sale. Here, The Wildcatters, an informal history of oil and oilmen by Samuel Tate Jr. Sam Tate spent most of his life as a journalist in Fort Wayne. He was an editorial writer for the Fort Wayne News Sentinel. But he married Mary Kelly, the daughter of the longtime superintendent of schools in Montpelier, Luther Kelly. And next time you're in Montpelier, there's a big frame house across the street from Funeral Home. That's where they lived. And Tate Sr., his father, was a wildcatter from Western Pennsylvania, came out here, promptly leased up 1,000 acres. And anyway, they came out here in 1893 when Sam Jr. was 10. But this is a history not only of Indiana, but the whole oil industry. Here's a map of the Trenton Rock oil field. This is a particular kind of porous limestone that extends in an arc from northwest Ohio over into Indiana. The southern edge of it really are as far south as the top of Hamilton County, which is Noble South. And The thing about it though, was that we had oil. We had lots of oil. You can bring up a map there for slide.
Let me see which.
Indiana oil and gas fields. Here, bring this one. Either one will give you an idea of the extent of the field. This is from a 1980 publication about the Indiana oil and gas industry that was published by the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. I found it in our Pacific Library. Great source though. The things that are clear down in the southwest corner of the state, that's an oil field that doesn't begin until 1938. And if you go down to Sullivan County, which is south of Terre Haute, there still are operating wells there. But the majors have stayed out of the field because they know that the way the arch is configured, the majority of it's over in Illinois where fracking is illegal. So it's certainly small producers down there. But the thing is, people ask me, well, what about this field? Well, the thing is, in the 19th century, one of the things that was commonplace was that they knew that they had this porous limestone, so they would use what they called torpedoes, which were charges of nitroglycerin. And once they brought a well in, they put a charge of this down and detonate it. And it would create a hollow in this porous limestone that the oil would then drain into. Problem with that, according to my geologist friend, is that there are terrific amounts of oil underneath that we still don't have the technology to get to. So if you want something to look forward to, well, maybe one of these days when that happens, all this stuff will come back. Anyway, if you want to find a copy of this, it's readily available on Amazon Marketplace. This was used as college textbook for years. So there are a lot of highlighted copies and things. But, people talk about history. They think, well, okay, is history a matter of the intersection of impersonal forces, or are there such a thing as heroes? Are there people who sense the direction of things and capitalize on it and do great things? And that's where that brings us to William Albert Kunkel. That is a graph of the production out of that same 1980 field publication, the DNR. And you can see that there are a couple big peaks in 1895 and 1905. And after that, things tail off. But it doesn't just disappear. One thing I found interesting was that I ran across a 1923 article about Montpelier that was in a Sunday issue of the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette. They were doing these little pieces about all places in their circulation area. And it said, now granted, these are pretty marginal producers, but even in 1923, within a 10-mile radius of Montpelier, there were still 250 producing wells. So this is not a phenomenon that just ended overnight. Okay. These are out of order.
Wow. I did the 3 steps you sent me.
Okay, that'll give you an idea of the overall size of the gas field. It's gigantic. And then there are the 2 maps of the state geologist reports over here. They're fascinating to look at because you can see how this thing spreads out from a little corner of Chester Township in Wells County to something that spans from the Ohio line clear over into Grant and Madison counties. William Albert Kunkel, born 1868. He grew up on a little farm that's a couple roads south of Toxin, East-West Road. It's number 13 or 14 cited in the Lancaster catalog, the Architectural Atlas. And if you go out there today, all that's there is a neat little brick and stone Tudor revival house that he apparently built for his parents. Anyway, he goes to town. He's an 1886 graduate of Lupton High School, which I think might have been the first graduating class. And then he's sort of at odds about what to do. He does a brief stint working as a clerk at one of the stores downtown here. Then he gets on as a sort of a crossing guard for one of the railroads, and then he does a stint as deputy county surveyor. He actually becomes county surveyor in his own right. Like, have a look at this stuff. That's in Brown. There's a portrait of Kunkel out at Derek's handbook. Derek's handbook, by the way, if you look on eBay, it's available on a flash drive. It's a great reference. But it was published in 1899. But see, in terms of gas development, in 1888, a group of Fort Wayne investors decided they organized a thing called the Salamone Mining and Gas Company. And they pitched the idea to the city council of Fort Wayne that they would supply natural gas to the city by building a pipeline up what's now the Norfolk Southern right of way. And the south end of that, their pumping station, was where the Montpelier High School was built later in 1922. The north end of it was up on Superior Street, what's now Hall's Gas House. But it's interesting to see as they're building this up through the field, you get a sense of how growth in that area just exploded. Montpelier at the beginning of the gas boom was just little burg of 4,600 people. By 1895, it was 5,000 people. And it was an item in 1889 or 90 about pipelines being built through Keystone down in southernmost county. And they said that 50 of the 60 houses in Keystone had elected to hook up to the gas main. So that, I would love to see ground penetrating radar or aerial photography of Keystone to see whether there's any physical remains of this stuff. But I know I had a friend who had grown up in Montpelier, and she said that in the 1940s on the northwest corner of town, you could walk out in the weeds, and there were all these paved streets that went nowhere. And all the houses that had ever stood on them had been taken off and moved elsewhere. So when the boom was off, it came off with a bump. Now, let's see. You got third one from the left on the bottom. There we go. Okay, there's the man. So that's William A. Kunkel in 1899. And it's interesting too. See, there's a section in Derek's handbook. It's called "Men Who Have Made the Petroleum Industry." He's in there. Abram Simmons is in there. Mike Long's in there. Simmons, strictly speaking, he's Kunkel's lawyer. But Long is another wildcatter. But anyway, the thing is, when Kunkel finally finds his niche, that pipeline to Fort Wayne was built by a partnership out of Pennsylvania, the Cudahy brothers. And the Cudahy brothers decided to stick around. Down in southern Wells County, they built a pipeline here, right there, Cudahy Station. Cudahy Station. That's the one building that was still remaining when we did the county inventory, early 80s. There's a shot of the complex that was supposed to be before it. But anyway, this was a gas pipeline to Kankakee, Illinois. It only operated that way for about 2 years before Johnny Rockefeller at Standard Oil bought it and converted it to his refineries over in Ohio. There's Cudahy Station. And look, this is way down south of Domestic. It's almost the county line. And the brick barn that you saw a picture of a second ago is that long gone. But this was quite complex.
Sorry.
Yeah, they've Simmons in there somewhere. But anyway, the thing is, there's this fellow, Abram Simmons, and he grows up on a farm just a stone's throw north of the cutting station. And apparently that's where these two men cross paths. And they form basically a lifelong partnership in which Kunkel's legal things are handled by Abe Simmons. Can you go back to the thing of the whole trigger? Okay, this is the write-up of Kunkel. That's in there. It's a nice brief resume of his early career. Even took a shot at being a one-room school teacher in Rock Creek Township for a little bit. I think what he soon learned, as had William H. Powers, the local builder architect, that a lot of the way that these teachers got paid was in room and board provided by the parents of their students. So they quickly went on to other pursuits. But apparently it's at the Cutting Station that Kunkel really finds his niche. He really finds the passion that's going to be what motivates the rest of his career in developing the oil field. And now, let's see. That's about there. This is his house. First floor of this is still standing at 328 South Oak Street. I don't think he built this house. I think this is actually probably the father-in-law that had been home his father-in-law, John. And sometime in the 20th century, the top half of that was taken off. And so when you go down the street now, what you see is this one-story house. It's got a terrace wall that replaces what was once the base of this porch. And apparently a lot of what you see there is remodelings of it, like the porch that were done for Kunkel by the local builder architect, Kunkel. It was back in 1981 when I interviewed his Kibley's daughter, Mary. She said that not long before then, she had a tile that was left over from a bathroom remodel that her dad had done in his house. And she set her teacup down on it and it cracked. And she said, "Oh dear, I've ruined Uncle's tile." Anyway, let's see. So, boy, I wish I had. Excuse me a second here. Okay, Cutting Station. Okay. Ground zero for William Kunkel in Bluffton in 1894. He and a partner put up a commercial building. It's called the Kunkel Brown Block. His partner is a guy named Dana Brown. It's over there in the oval. And Dana Brown here, he's another guy who has come out from Pennsylvania. And on the second story of this building, there's present day and period shots of this thing. There were the offices of something like 4 oil companies. And one thing that there's the building as it is now. And then there's a historic shot of it from the east in there too. But anyway, upstairs is the headquarters of all these different oil partnerships, what we would probably call limited partnerships. The thing that's interesting about Kunkel, the pattern is he's always the secretary treasurer. He always makes sure he's the guy who handles the money. Whether it's the Marion Bluffton and Eastern Interurban Company, whether it's all the little state banks he charters in Petroleum and Liberty Center and Uniondale, all these different places, Penita. And there you go, the business director. You see the oil producers, the Midway Oil, the Scotland Oil. Yeah, that's Mr. Kunkel at work. And then on the left column, you see Daly, Simmons, and Daly. That's Abe Simmons. But let's see. There's a picture of Abe Simmons' house. Now, while Mr. Kunkel has a pretty modest house, his lawyer has a very fancy one on East Washington Street that's built in 1898 and is still standing, but greatly altered. But their offices were in the second story of the Wells County Bank, which is where Flagstar is now, Market Bank. But excuse me. Yeah, Dana Brown's an interesting character. I ran across an item in a Montpelier paper. There was somebody who'd come out from Pennsylvania, and they, Kunkel introduced him to Dana Brown. And this guy said, didn't you have a different name in Pennsylvania? He said, yeah, I did. Well, it turns out Dana Brown keeps going west. He follows the oil, and he ends up in San Diego, where he buys an orange grove that he turns into an oil field. And what a great movie that's sort of tells somewhat this story. The 1940 movie you can get a DVD of. It's entitled Boomtown. Spencer Tracy, Clark Gable, Claudette Colbert, Teddy Lamar. And there are a lot of these guys who follow the oil. Some of them from here go to I think it was Kansas, if I remember right. But they do move on when the pickings seem to get slim. So hang on a second. Yeah, the Marion Bluffton and Eastern is an interesting company. Like a lot of short line interurbans, its main reason for being is that it makes a connection between two rail lines. In this case, it goes from Bluffton, where it's headquartered, in the building that until a couple of years ago was the county highway garage out on West Washington Street. It goes down through Van Buren rather, to get to a railhead at Marion. And there was supposed to be a sister line called the Bluffton, Geneva, and Salina to go to Salina, Ohio, but they never got right away beyond Geneva, Indiana. So it was basically a milk run that served lumberyards and things like the creamery that was out at Riverside, out just south of Veracruz. But nonetheless, again, he's the secretary treasurer of the Marion Bluffton and Eastern. That's a position that's eventually inherited by his son, William A. Kunkel Jr. But this is one of the cars that is used by the MDE. This is in a book called Fort Wayne and Wabash Valley Trolleys by George Bradley. So another little project of his is the Bliss Hotel. Got the envelope view of the Bliss. Bliss Hotel, well, that's the remodel. Anyway, the Bliss Hotel is built at the northeast corner of Washington and Main Streets in 1883. Rather modest building. But in 1904, Kunkel organized a stock company. They buy it from the widow of Jeffrey Bliss, and they expand it. There you go. That's what a roof will look like. And that little spot right here, that's really imaginary. What was actually there was an Italian house that had been where Jeffrey Bliss actually lived. But there's a stock company organized. One of the stockholders, interestingly enough, is Craig Leonard, or Kunkel, the architect. Apparently, he's taking part of his fee in stock. After I had gone down to interview Mary Kunkel in 1981, about a month later, every once in a while, Fred Park, my old high school principal, would come over. Once he found out I had a copy stand, he'd round up batches of historic photos and have you slice them. He said, well, did you know Mary Kunkel came to Bluffton a little bit ago? I said, no, I didn't hear anything about it. Well, it turned out she came up here and Clevefields had to meet her at the Old First Bank so she could cash her shares in the Bliss Hotel. But he had other investments. You got the one on, for instance, he used his wealth for some good things. Like during World War One, he bought the entire bond issue to build the Wells County Hospital. He also bought an entire Liberty bond that was issued during World War One as well. And one thing that Scott Bushnell wrote a great history a few years ago of the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette and how it came about. But thing was, William A. Kunkel Jr., who you'll find on the newsletter here, is born in 1895, lives till 1948. He inherits a lot of these things, like the officer posts in these various state banks on the Marion, Left, and Eastern. That. Well, the thing is, what his father had used, he used some of his money to become a player in Democratic Party politics on a statewide basis. He was the long-time 8th District Chairman of the Indiana Democratic Party. And so at intervals, it's no wonder he wanted a nice hotel. One of the things he used it for was about every year or two, he'd invite all the county chairmen in to have lunch on him, and then they'd duly reelect him. So anyway, William A. Kunkel Jr. he goes to IU, and then he goes on to Harvard Law. And in 1932, the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette was up for sale. There's Bill Kunkel Jr. Oscar Follinger, who was the publisher of the News Sentinel, had his first newspaper job at either the Journal or the Gazette. So he always had kind of a soft spot for it. So when this thing would go under, he'd buy it, put it back in shape, put it up for sale. And in 1932, there were 3 investors: James Fleming of Fort Wayne, Virgil Simmons of, by then, Indianapolis, and Paul McNutt, who was the dean of the IU Law School at the time, and he was about to become the New Deal governor of Indiana in 1932's election. And one thing that was interesting about the political connectedness of William A. Kunkel Jr., so when you read into his obituary, it turns out that his college roommates were Paul McNutt and Wendell Willkie, who was the 1940 Republican presidential candidate up against FDR. And so William A. Kunkel Jr. had his own political connections. But anyway, since none of these 3 guys who are buying the Journal can run the thing on a day-to-day basis, William A. Kunkel Jr. becomes the publisher. And while he's the publisher, he also branches out into other things. He starts a communications company. He starts WKJG Radio, William Kunkel Journal-Gazette, ring a bell. One thing that's interesting, see, he actually dies at his desk. He's only 53 in 1948. And this is a tribute to it, granted the competing paper, the News Sentinel. So he's very well thought of guy. Very much a fellow who, he always lived in Bluffton, but his professional life was in Fort Wayne. And if you can write interurbans to Fort Wayne until 1940, that's not too bad, not too hard to do. But nonetheless, one thing that struck me about his radio stations was that in 1948, in his obits, they said he had also started an FM station in Fort Wayne. And that was news to me because FM radio, I think of Herman Zepps and WCRD, of course, right here in Bluffton. Yeah, I always thought FM radio was really a phenomenon of the early 1960s, but apparently not. But Kunkel Jr. he's got a number of companies that he controls, some of which have been started by his dad, some of which he started, like the Fort Wayne Communications Company. And Another son of W.A.K. Sr. is Kenneth. He's the middle. And he becomes the head of the Indiana Department of Conservation. He's the name. That's the Kunkel who's the namesake of Kunkel Lake out here at the state park. Okay. I've been down to see it. One of the Kunkel descendants tells me that if you go down to the inn at Spring Mill State Park, there's a full-length portrait of him in the lobby. And one thing that's also interesting about Spring Mill State Park is that the Pioneer Village there is where most of the artifacts that Charlie Deem, the local druggist and state forester, bought at the Paxson estate sale in 1922 and gave to the Indiana Department of Conservation, where they became the nucleus of what's now the Indiana State Museum. But, hang on a second. Kenny Kunkel, again, is a political player. Excuse me a second here. He was chairman of the State Conservation Commission. This is what's now called the Natural Resources Commission. It's the policymaking committee of the Indiana DNR to this day. But like most of these other people, he's buried out in Fairview at the ground you see in the newsletter. He was a graduate of IU, served as an assistant commissioner of the Indiana Conservation Department from 33 to 41. One thing that he did during the Depression was that west of town here, he owned a farm. And there was a piece in the paper about how he was making that available for anybody who couldn't afford to buy groceries to go out there and plant their own crops. That was his little bit of charity there. He was director of the Division of Fish and Game during the McNutt administration and the Townsend administration. Governor Schricker, director of the Conservation Department beginning in 49. Director of the department by Governor Matt Welsh in January 1961. Governor Welsh said yesterday, I'm greatly shocked by Mr. Kunkel's passing. One of the best loved men in Indiana and had devoted his life to conservation of Indiana's natural resources. Now, and then there was Marjorie, the youngest. Marjorie Kunkel was a 1960 graduate of Bluffton High School, and she married a man named Harry Brown. Well, Harry Brown was the eldest of three sons of William Benjamin Brown, the fellow who made arts and crafts lighting here in Bluffton from 1906 until 1923. And by virtue of a patent he had on a method of making a wood mission style light fixture that could be shipped knocked down, he said he had something like 60 to 80% of the national market, the North American market. I mean, I got brown lamps that came from Quebec and Key West, and people all over the place. One of my favorite pictures of a brown related site is a bar in Juarez, Mexico that has brown lamps hanging off the backboard. And the lobby of Moose Jaw, the Imperial Hotel in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, which was a railroad reserve. So anyway, now, let's see. Okay, like I said, William A. Kunkel Sr., he has a strong hand in engineering the election of Plumk 32, although he doesn't actually live to see it. There's a portrait lower left there. There's a portrait of him that comes out in a newsletter called the Indiana Democrat, and a glowing tribute to him. And then there's pages 2 and 3 for the tribute. Anyway. Now, in terms of William A. Kunkel's are up. There's a William A. Kunkel III, that's the son of Kunkel Jr. And where's that find a grave page? When W.A.K. the third. Okay. Last, you should get the impression that the Kunkels have died out. Oh boy, they're everywhere. A lot of them are doctors to read this. William Albert Kunkel III is buried at Covington Gardens up on the northwest side of the lake. But it's just on the north side of Covington Road. But you see that he was a dentist. He was big. He was a big child. He was a varsity athlete, earned his foot in baseball, and subsequently recipient of the year I-Man Award, lifelong sports enthusiast, values for established Kunkel family and Dale scholarship for IU football, and a member of the Wells Society. And he went to Plymouth Congregation Church, Shriners, for the year Florida, Bougie Club for St. Andrews Beach Club. And then we've got a son, William IV of New Canaan, Connecticut, and Dr. Sanford Kunkel of Carmel, Indiana, grandchildren Sanford Carmel Jr. of New York City, Billy Kunkel Whalen of Carmel, William A. Kunkel of Fifth, Toledo, Ohio, Dr. William Kunkel of Albuquerque, New Mexico, Grant Kunkel of New York City, and Dr. Kunkel of Indiana. He might not be here, but very still around. And one thing that's interesting that one of the descendants told me, they still get royalty checks for Oklahoma. So I have to say, for a young man who grew up kind of dirt poor out on a farm just south of Tucson, this guy did all right. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this. But thank you for coming. Any questions? Like I say, you're welcome to look at the oil maps over here. Go on Amazon Marketplace and get a copy of this. This is, like I say, this is the only first-hand account. There's a great story. When he's 10 years old in 1883 and they've just shown up in Montpelier, he relates how he and his mother are crossing Main Street when they almost get in the crossfire of a he says there was a dispute between a gas wildcatter and an oil wildcatter over the virtues of a certain lady. I'll leave it at that. But anyhow, lots of history. Like I say, one of my other little projects is write a history of the boom. There is an excellent book published by Arcadia about Indiana's gas boom that was published about 10, 15 years ago by Jim Class and one of his grad students when Jim was at Ball State. And it's a good book. It's centered primarily on the fields down around Hamilton County and just north. But nonetheless, again, it's to my knowledge, at least one of the few things that print on the subject at all. But one thing that it just amazes me how invisible the boom is in the county histories. I mean, the Bowen history is published in 1905, Wells County history, and yet it's pretty much silent on the subject.
Do you know how many still working in Wells County now?
I really don't. There were a little over 2,500 wells. You get that map. There was a map the USGS did in 1962 that I put in there. And like I say, the thing that my geologist friend tells me is that whenever the technology gets there, it could all come back. He said Southern Wells County is still floating on a lake of them.
Well, they kind of had periods, I actually lived in Rock Creek Township, right out Superman's house.
Yeah.
On the map place they dug there in the 70s.
Yeah.
Real old, and that was opened up. Richmond.
Mm-hmm.
My brother's in-law place in Liberty Township, just 2 miles south, 124. They're pumping in there now, and there's
Oh,
3 or 4.
yeah.
But I don't know.
I know my geologist friend uses the LiDAR system to look at the topography, and if you know what you're looking at, you can interpret where the undulations in the landscape represent gas ducts underneath. And nowadays, the majority of the things that can be gotten at are out on the perimeter. But that's not to say it's always going to be there. But yeah, I think it'd be pretty cool if all that came back.
Yeah.
You know, great book that'll give you an idea of what things were like here during the boom. In 1951, there was a book published called Spindletop Memories, because it was the 50th anniversary of the discovery of oil at Spindletop, which is down near Beaumont, Texas. Somebody at the University of Texas had the presence of mind to go around and interview all the people who are still alive. It's a great read, and it's not hard to imagine the things they describe as being exactly the kinds of things that happen here as well. But one other thing, Mr. Kunkel was never one to miss the main chance. Within a month of after the discovery of oil at Spindletop, there's an account in the Bluffton paper about how he is down in Texas prospecting. So anyway, yeah.
Well, we have other couples here. And how are you guys, how do you fit into this?
John Kunkel was my grandfather. His brother was William Kunkel Senior. William Kunkel Junior, then was a cousin to my dad. Yes. Generation. So confusing to read the history, because you have to really look and pump out.
I know. You know, until about 2 weeks ago, I didn't know there was a William Kunkel the Fifth. But you know, like I say, things you can look like looking up things on Finder. But yeah, they're a fascinating family.
We're still couples here.
Hmm?
You had like Norman had the bowling alley,
Oh, okay.
and Steve Stan had Stan Dennis. We had the Kunkel Airport and Fox and
Mm-hmm.
Lazy Bay. 3 of us still here. My dad's.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, like I say, welcome to it, man. Got any other questions? Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Greg. Is there any other business we need to have? And I guess, is there refreshments there, people, I guess, who took care of that? Wasn't me. I guess that's for us, isn't that right? You know?
Yeah. One of the plants, first crazy over.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
I'm gonna take this back.
No other business, entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Got a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So
Okay. Second. Okay, everybody in favor, say aye. Hang on. All right, thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you for joining on Zoom, and I'll end the meeting now.
Wow.
Hopefully the presentation is recorded for others to view later. So,
yeah,
thanks for coming.
Sure. You guys feel flat.
Thank you, Tom.